Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya Locker, and I'm the Programs and Events Coordinator here at the Museum at Eldridge Street. Thank you so much for joining us for this program exploring the life and work of Itshak Holtz with Richard McBee, Sylvia Herskowitz, and Dr. Aliza Holtz. There will be a Q&A at the very end of the programs, but please feel free as we go to put your questions in the chat box. I can ask them for you at the end during the Q&A, or you can wait to raise your hand at the end and you'll be able to unmute yourselves. For those of you who haven't visited us before, the museum at Eldridge Street is housed in the historic 1887 Eldridge Street Synagogue. The building was built again in 1887, and it was the first grand synagogue built by Eastern European Jews in the United States. The building was nearly lost to neglect in the mid-20th century before a massive 20-year, $20 million restoration project returned the space to its former glory and for public use. We have a ton of both in-person and virtual programs like this one. I'd like to tell you just about a few of them before I introduce our speakers today. We have a bunch of walking tours coming up. We have one this Sunday all about the classic novel All of a Kind Family. It's a wonderful family walking tour, but it's good for both kids and adults to kind of relive the stories from that novel from Cindy Taylor. We also have some virtual programs coming up after this one. We have one with author Scott Seligman about his new book. It's called The Chief Rabbi's Funeral, The Untold Story of America's Largest Anti-Semitic Riot. It's an event that happened here on the Lower East Side, and it's very unknown, so I'd encourage folks to come learn about that. That's on January 23rd at 6 p.m. We also have a Zoom program coming up all about the Jewish connections behind Henry Toulouse-Lautrec. And that's another installation in our series, Art History Through a Jewish Lens. That program is on February 27th at 6 p.m. We also, in March, a little bit of something from the end of our first quarter coming up, but on March 23rd, we have our next concert, which is all about the Borscht Belt. It's called Remains of America's Jewish Vacation Land. It'll be a very special program, both a musical program with the concert and also a book talk with a photographer who has photographed the ruins of what used to be the Borscht Belt, where the Catskills, where mostly Jewish people from New York went to go on vacation, as I'm sure many of you here in the chat remember. And we also have composers who've composed a concert around her photographs. So it'll be a combination program, but it should be really, really wonderful. You can check out all of our programs on our website. I'm going to paste that link after this intro into the chat to our events calendar, so you can check that out. And now with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Richard McBee here, who is the author of Living Jewish Art, the work of Itshak Holtz. Richard McBee is a painter of biblical subject matter and a writer on Jewish art. He covered the Jewish art scene for the Jewish Press from 2000 to 2014, and he's also written for The Forward, Jewish Week, Jewish Ideas Daily, and Mosaic Magazine. He was a founding member of the Jewish Art Salon, and he continues to exhibit, lecture, and curate exhibitions of Jewish art. We have Dr. Aliza Holtz here, who's an accomplished medical and scientific writer whose work has been published in numerous journals and spans a breadth of therapeutic areas. As a child, Dr. Holtz watched her father, Itshak Holtz, paint still lifes and portraits of people in their apartment studio. She and her mother often accompanied him on outdoor landscape painting sessions, and by watching her father paint and listening to his conversations about art, she learned about composition, light, and color, which she applies to her own photography, which has been exhibited and published. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have Sylvia Herskowitz. Sylvia Herskowitz is the Director Emerita of the Yeshiva University Museum. In her 34-year tenure, she moved the museum from the university's main campus in Washington Heights to the Center for Jewish History on West 16th, which gave it an international presence and attracted thousands of visitors annually to exhibitions and programs. She's a founding member of the Council of American Jewish Museums. Mrs. Herskowitz was instrumental in promoting the careers of Jewish artists internationally. Under her leadership, the museum exhibited the works of Itshak Holtz in 1992. And with that, I'm going to turn the screen over to Richard, who's going to start us off and start fielding questions from our panelists this evening. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya, and obviously the museum at Eldridge Street, aka Eldridge Street Museum, Synagogue, and of course, Sylvia and Aliza for joining me. This is a real honor. It was an honor to write this book. I have to tell you, I met Itshak in 2003 on assignment from the Jewish Press, and I interviewed him and interviewed him about his art. It was the nicest thing. He was just the sweetest man I've met, and a real artist. And didn't think of it since then until 2 years ago when I was asked to write this. I want to just have some thanks to some people, very specifically to Sholem Sabar, who actually recommended me for this. I thank him very much. Misha Boletsky, who designed the book and worked with me extensively on the book. Amy K. Hughes, who edited it, and Jake Hestenbaum, who was essentially responsible to make this project happen, as I understand it. So you see, we have here a portrait of a Chassid that Holtz painted approximately 1990, looking back. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're going to look back at his work and try to get to know him a bit. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Of course, my slide presentation is not working. There we go. There we go. Okay, good. So this is pretty much the table of contents of the book, so you get an idea of what the book is about. It's, of course, published by Abbeville Press, and it was published last month. We've got a foreword by Jay Kestenbaum, introduction by David Siegel, and the birth of the artist in the new world, making a unique Jewish art, and maturity and recognition. There are plates. There are something like over 160 plates in this movie, this book, meaning illustrations, and they cover the subjects of tradition, a simple Jew, man and his creator, the Jewish year, portraits, and landscapes. This is a bit of a chronology of Holtz's life. He's born in Poland in 1925 in a small town, or actually a medium-sized town, smack in the middle of Poland. He and his family make Aliyah to Israel in 1935. He attends the Betzalel school because he's suddenly interested, and not suddenly, actually for a while, is very interested in being an artist. But he finds that Betzalel, unfortunately, as great a school, it was the best school Israel had in terms of art, is mainly commercial art. And more he realizes he wants to be a fine artist. And so he does an astounding thing. He moves as a young man to New York in 1950. He has lived through the War of Independence. He lives in Yerushalayim, in the neighborhood of Geula, and he decides to leave and to make his way as an artist in New York, essentially the art capital of the world. Very gutsy thing to do. I'm not going to read through every single date here, but just so that you know, not only does he move to New York and start to become an artist, but immediately he marries his wife, Gertrude Ruth Beck, and that will shape his life for the entirety of his life. He also attends the Art Students League, the central school of art in 1950 in a kind of an independent way. And his daughter, Aliza, is born in 52, his son in 66. He's sponsored by Mr. Mendel Aviv in 1968, which is very important. Before then, he's simply trying to struggle to live as an artist, working at a job which is not really making fine art. And some man turns to him in shul and says, you know what? I'm going to sponsor you. I'm going to pay for all of your supplies, and I'm going to take the paintings that you make, but I want you to make art. An astounding thing, and really changed his life. Really, his Hasidic images really start also in the early 60s. And he's established his studio at 118 East 28th Street. The reason why that address is important is because I walk past that every single day. I go to the same shul that he went to for Mincha Marav. I go there for Shacharis. So suddenly I've got a connection with this man, and it's really rather fruitful. We'll continue with that, with the looking at the images, because really that's what I want you to see here. Not just his history, but really also the kinds of paintings that he does. This is a very early painting. This is a painting of his wife. In 1953. It is glorious. It is absolutely beautiful, a beautiful stately portrait of his young wife. Remember, he's only landed in New York. He's only here for 3 years. he got some training and obvious practice in terms of painting in Israel, but now really his entire training is in New York. And after 3 years, he makes this really masterful portrait. There's two portraits, one of Aliza, done in 1955 on the right, and of course his son Aryeh in 1979. He loves portraits. He does portraits early on. He does it to make a living, but somehow it's not for him. It's not the thing that he really wants to throw his creative energies into. So here we have in 1970, and this, I would say, starts to establish him as the kind of artist that he is and will become. And that's called a genre artist, which is an artist who focuses on the everyday life of essentially ordinary human beings. But he obviously loves people. He has a feel for the family. He has a feel for the fabric of life. And you see it in this simple painting of a family trudging past the newsstand. Probably, by the way, I make the assumption that actually this is his family in the foreground. This is his son Aryeh, this is his wife, and here's Holtz behind them. Okay, and we assume that Aliza probably was off at Yeshiva. Oh, and Aliza is nodding. Yes, in fact, perhaps that was the case. This is actually in its way typical of Holtz, in so much as he loves dusk, that magical time when it's no longer day and not yet night. The lights are coming on. He also loves the snow. These are signature things in his artwork that I've grown really to love. Well, not the other half of him, but one side of him is, of course, the Hasidic world, the Jewish world, that he grew up in Gula in Yerushalayim as a child, and started to refamiliarize himself with it by the mid-60s. And more, it drew him. And this scene of this wedding is very typical of some of the weddings that he painted. But it's typical not just so much, and he shows a couple under a chuppah. No, again, you have dusk. So you see the lights just coming on, and you have the couple underneath, and of course, seemingly the entire community, neighborhood coming around, but again, very specific touches that are Holtz. With Holtz's paintings, it's very common to find children. Children are in the paintings and are central characters. They're doing things, and you see, they're observing. And then of course, you have the klezmers, which is kind of part and parcel of a wedding scene. But again, very importantly, Holtz includes someone in the foreground right here, this old Hasid, this man who looks like he's actually maybe not part of the ceremony at all. He's simply walking by with his Gemara. Lo and behold, he's looking at you, the audience. And that's another technique that as a genre painter, Holtz excels in, bringing you into the painting by getting a figure in the painting to connect with you, the viewer.
And if I may interject.
Please, yeah.
Could you please go back to that painting? Thank you. What my father did is make sure that a person looks at the entire painting by leading the eye around. If you look at where the brightest lights are, the street lamp, the lamps, the candle flames, and you see how they are positioned almost in a U that takes you through the entire painting. That's one technique that he used. Another is the use of color. If you look at where the reds are, the brightest reds, they also take you through the main parts of the painting. And that was one of his techniques. And that's a technique that Jan van Eyck used also, and some of the other great masters.
This is exactly what Holtz does. He obviously was familiar with the old masters. But he utilizes a number of their techniques in this thing called genre painting. There's a painting of the people. This is not a religious scene. And in fact, he doesn't paint scenes from the Bible. Even though evidently as a teenager in Yerushalayim, one of the things he did was he drew them, and his school praised him for it. But that was not the route that he chose. He was much more interested in literally the life of people. And so let's go further. This is really one of my favorite paintings, a Simchas Torah holiday from 1969. It's an exuberant painting. again, really rather early still in his career. Remember, he paints well into perhaps up until the 2010 at least. He continues to make art really till his very last day, but as a painter, he's painting for many, many years. But this is a very, very early masterpiece. It's a masterpiece because it's showing, aside from a genre scene of Hasidim dancing at Simchas Torah, men dancing with the Torah on the right, and men just simply dancing together in the center. But again, one of his main techniques is to include children involved in these scenes and to make a narrative of it. And that's what he does. He starts out with, over here on the left-hand side, this little boy with his not only his talis cotton on, but also his little Simchas Torah flag. But look at him. He's now looking back into the painting. And what is he looking at? He's looking at this young girl who, by the bima, is transfixed by the men dancing, and perhaps a bit apprehensive about it because it's scary. It's scary for a little girl to have these great big men pounding away in the shul. And so suddenly he's drawn you into a drama of great celebration, but also seen a bit through the eyes of a child, giving it a dimension that is not just simply reportage. It is much more a matter of getting the sense of the complexity of this kind of celebration. So let's go to the next painting. Aha. So this painting was on the cover of, let's see here, I actually have it here, okay? This painting, this is the catalog from the Yeshiva University Museum exhibition of his work in 1992 and 1993. It was a major exhibition. It was held uptown. Actually, maybe Sylvia can tell us how many works were in it. It was a major retrospective of his work. And really, it gave him a much more public face than just the fact that at that point in his life, he was already actually selling plenty of paintings. He had plenty of patrons, but this exposed him to a larger public. Sylvia, do you have any comments about that exhibition in '93?
Well, I told you, I told the story of how it came about, because we had never met Itshak Holtz, even though he lived in Washington Heights. I only became aware of him shortly before he came to visit me in the museum. And when he came, he wanted an exhibition. And I would have been delighted to give him the exhibition, but he said it had to have a catalog. And the money that we had for the museum didn't include a catalog publication fund. And I told him that. I said, we'll give you the whole gallery if you want, all the galleries for your exhibition, but we don't have money for a catalog. So that was the end, and he walked out. And he came back. I don't know whether it was the following summer or we waited another summer, but he came back. And this time I had the idea, which struck me, of asking him who his clients were. And that really opened the door, because the first name he mentioned was Leonard Kestenbaum. And by chance, really, I knew Leonard very well. I had just met him at a dinner that he went to for my brother-in-law, and he had given me his business card, which was even more amazing. Because why would a business card from a man in the refrigeration business want to give me his card when I ran a museum? But still, I took the card and I put it into my rotary on my desk. So when I said to Rick, I asked Yitzhak, who are your clients? And he said to me, the first one was Leonard Kestenbaum. I couldn't believe it. I had his card right there. So I picked up the phone and called him 5 minutes later. And that was how I got Leonard to agree to sponsor the exhibition and the catalog. So Yitzhak finally had his request granted.
As you said earlier, in an earlier conversation we had, that felt like divine providence. That felt like it was meant to be.
Absolutely. And you know what? Divine providence played a great role in my career at the museum with other artists too. So when I wrote my story of my career, I ended with that my whole career was made possible by Hashgacha Pratit, divine providence.
Our job is just to be aware that it's happening and to seize it. So let me go further. Let me go move on with some of the other artwork we have to look at today, okay? Okay. So Holtz was an enormously diverse artist. He certainly did not only paint Hasidim. They were a great focus of his work, but again, as a genre painter, his focus and his love was human life, and almost more importantly, family life. So he did lots of paintings on family summer vacations, much to the chagrin sometimes of his wife, who just wanted to relax. But no, you take him into the woods and he suddenly wants to set up an easel and wants to make paintings. And this painting is actually indicative of that. This is somewhere, I'm not sure if it's in the Catskills or it's in Bucks County, but it's obviously a family, and I get the sense that it's actually perhaps his family, sitting down at a picnic table in a beautiful bucolic setting with this very important person over here watching. Now, this is, as Aliza has told me very frequently, this is actually his wife, Ruth. He would paint her in the painting because, first of all, she was part of the scene. And also, it was, in a way, it was his way of saying, okay, so I'm taking time out of our vacation. I'm doing now the work that I do, but I'm going to include you in it, meaning I'm going to include my family in it. He's really an extraordinary artist. As a genre artist, he effectively lives the art that he's making. And so that's really one of his great qualities. Let's look at another painting. So here, synagogue interior, much later in his career, this is 1999. This is in Yerushalayim. And you have a number of paintings like this, and you'll see them in, I don't know if I've actually shown you, the book is really a rather wonderful book. Aside from the fact that I happen to have written it, it's really a hefty kind of coffee table book with, I think I may have mentioned, over 160 illustrations of his work. The number of paintings he does of interiors of synagogues always have, he's never just treating the synagogue like it's a still life. He's never treating like the people like they're just objects in there. There's always a narrative going on in his paintings. And this one, the narrative is, of course, all the men here are sitting and learning. They're learning Talmud or Torah. And so this is where, quote, they live during the days. This is where they spend their time. But notice something else. There's another presence here. And the presence here is light, is the sunlight coming in, and it becomes a separate presence of, if I dare say, the divine, but also the notion of beauty. The inside of this synagogue is not just a document. This is actually an ode to the beauty of the inside of the study hall that Holtz gets so beautifully. Let's go further. So here, this is, again, a rather late painting. This is in 2001. Remember, he's starting really the series of Hasidim and paintings seriously in the early 60s. So we're talking about 40 years later. And this painting is one of my favorite of, again, the genre painting, but with a twist. So, okay, you would say it's obviously of, let us say, a young man and his father sitting and learning a piece of Talmud. Okay, but I maintain that this is actually a much more complex interchange between the two of them. The young boy, it seems to me, has just asked his father a question on a line in the Talmud, and which is, by the way, I would say, the book that the young boy is holding right here in his hand. That's the Talmud. That's a large volume there. And notice there's a smaller volume on top of it. Now, either the boy has brought up a question from that the father has to now find the answer in the small book, or the boy himself has said, what about this commentator over here? So the interchange here, again, this is not just painting people who happen to be sitting and studying together. No, it is a warm, familial interchange between a son and a father doing things that they both are essentially devoted to and deeply engaged in. There's a great deal of love and tenderness in this, in the simple, though, genre painting, and really rather beautiful as such. So, changing subjects again, but which is typical of Holtz. Like I said, he has a wide range of subjects. He painted many, many scenes of individuals shopping for sukkahs. This is done in 1990, as you can see. And again, this is a very typical one. Actually, Aliza, you said this is Williamsburg?
Yes.
Yes, this is Williamsburg. And as is typical in Williamsburg, as is in the Lower East Side, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, you have the tables with all of the arboretum, the 4 species on them, the esrogim, right, and the lulavs, and the etc. Here, everyone examining it, right? You see over here there's individuals walking by. They've already gotten their objects for the Sukkot holiday, and even women involved, kids again. The thing about Holtz is that he's not just about adults, he's also about including children, and in this painting, himself. Right here is a self-portrait of Itshak Holtz. And again, it's, how shall I say it? I sensed it when I met him in 2003. This is a real artist. And he rolls up his sleeves and he is part of the things that he is painting. This is the epitome of genre painting, but of an artist who is he's more than just a craftsman, even though the Lord knows he thought of himself very much as a craftsman, but he's an involved craftsman in the specifics of that which he is painting. Let's go to the next one. So he is coming from shul. It's in Yerushalayim. You can almost recognize the courtyards, either in Gula, Meir Sharim. And you see on the right, the 2 men coming back from shul. They're carrying their telesim and in their hands. And here you have a woman and her child returning from the market, a typical morning scene with a beautiful Jerusalem light, but something else is happening. So that's the right side of the painting. On the left side of the painting, suddenly there's this young man sitting here. His legs crossed. As far as I can tell, his head isn't covered. He doesn't have a beard. He seems perhaps a bit of an outsider. He's observing those who are coming home from shul. This is a whole commentary on the fact that even in these communities, not everybody is religious. Not everybody's on the same page, but it's the texture of difference that makes that interesting. And then, again, one of my favorite parts of the painting is the cat. Holtz evidently liked cats, to say the least. Aliza tells me that the family, right, always had cats.
Yes, we had cats.
Right. And lo and behold, the cats become part of the painting, not in every painting, but in many. You look for them. But what's interesting about a number of his cats is that this cat is not just sitting there, he's looking back at you, the viewer, which cats tend to do, but that's a technique in which brings you, the viewer, into the painting. Oh, wait a minute, that cat's looking at me, meaning this is not a anonymous snapshot. There is, in fact, actually a warmth and an involvement in this, that a care for the animal and a care for actually the entire interchange between the Hasidim, the man who very well, it may not be actually religious, and the cat, which is part of the Jerusalem landscape. So we're kind of coming to the end of where my presentation of his paintings. Now, like I said, there's over 160 illustrations here, so there's much more work, and I was really given the limitations of time. But this one, again, is one of these typical aspects of Holtz's work that you simply don't see in other artists' work, and that he is able to take something that is one thing, put it into the context of something that's rather different, and then give us a totally new view of what the subject could be. He expands subjects. So here you have a bucolic scene. It's either in the Catskills, or it's in Bucks County, or some other place in the metropolitan New York area where he, quote, vacationed. And you see, here is a gazebo. Here's the hearth in which, various meals can be cooked, and, all the cut logs. Great. It just sounds like a wonderful summer vacation. And there's a little boathouse, right? A beautiful lake. By the way, notice he brings in details that make it feel like this is an ordinary place, but a very down-to-earth place. Look what's in the middle is a fire extinguisher. So, okay, but what's this painting about? Well, you know what it's really about? It's about this Hussid. It's about this Hussid who's sitting here on the edge of a rowboat, right? We don't know if he went out on the rowboat, if he goes out the rowboat, if he even wants to, but what's he doing? He's doing what he loves to do, which is to open up a Gemara, open up a Talmud, and to learn, and to study it in this beautiful setting. So suddenly now you have a whole other idea of what learning Talmud is. It's not just nothing the matter with it, of course, like we saw earlier, right? The synagogue with everyone sitting and learning their texts. Okay, but here, this is taking the Talmud and taking the experience of learning it and imbuing it, putting it in this beautiful, natural setting, one that for him is absolutely natural, meaning it is a normal thing to do because people go on vacation. Well, if I'm going to go on a vacation, but I'm a religious Jew, doesn't mean I leave my books behind. No, of course not. I'm going to bring my intellectual and spiritual interests smack into nature and make them all work together, which is exactly what this painting does. And that's what's really so stunning about this little painting. Let's see what we got next. Okay, so this is this painting on the left of trees in the country, right? And a man raking the leaves. I wasn't going to put in. It's a nice painting, very good, okay. But Aliza said, wait a minute, that has a whole story. And so she sent me this photograph, which she took on the right. Aliza, could you tell me about this this slide?
Yes, my father saw this scene of the road with the leaning trees. It was autumn, and he thought it would be nice to have a man raking. That man is my father. He asked me to take a picture of him raking leaves, just so that he could get some specific angle right, whatever it was. So he's out there raking leaves. I am obviously positioned high up and looking down on him and taking that photograph. And then he incorporated that into the painting, which gives the painting a sense of dimension and a little bit of action. It's not just a leaning tree.
It also, if I may add, is again another example in which the artist places himself in the midst of his motif. And he's not just an observer. He says, no, you know what? It'd be more interesting if someone is raking those leaves, because first of all, it shows you the effect of the beautiful leaves. Well, those are all going to fall off the tree. Wait a minute. That's about the season. That's about the nature of life, that beautiful things, sometimes the leaves fall. But we have to collect them up together. He's making a whole poem about this, but using himself as the fulcrum in which you can discuss that. That's the genius of this painting. And so thank you, Aliza, for including this.
I should also add that he did not paint from photographs. In fact, he could tell immediately when an artist did paint from photographs. And I asked him how he could tell. And I eventually learned that the camera lens will distort the perspective a bit, which my father did not do. And he could tell by also some of the detail that appeared that an artist painting from life does not include that kind of detail. And he's obviously a very detailed painter. He loves to include details.
Right.
So I just want to make the point that in general, no, he did not paint from photographs, but he did use photographs on occasion as guides or to remember certain details. For example, one time we were at a place where a flautist was playing, and he asked the flautist if he could paint him. And my father asked me, because I had my camera with me, would I please take some pictures of him, but especially focus on the hands.
Right.
And he was a master at painting hands.
Yeah, very difficult part of the human anatomy.
Yeah.
So let's see what the next slide is, which I think is actually the last slide that I'll have, and then I have some questions for both of you. Again, it's been a pleasure to work on this book for the last 2 years, and it's been a pleasure and an honor, really, to get to know Yitzhak much better than I did with the one interview I had with him in 2003. So let's see here, but I have some questions for you, okay? So let me actually ask Sylvia. Let's see here. So you kind of told us, Sylvia, when you first discovered Yitzhak's works, because he walked into your office, effectively, right? Essentially, and you've told us how the exhibition came to be. What were the consequences of the exhibition? Had the museum done genre painting as a subject before in the Jewish genre painting? And were there other exhibitions that happened after?
Well, the very first exhibition we had when 1974, 75, when I began, were the genre paintings in Moritz Oppenheim.
Okay.
And after that, we often showed Isidore Kaufman and who was the other one? I just can't think of his name right now. But, you know, in every century.
Marcy Gottlieb?
What?
Marcy Gottlieb?
No, we didn't have Gottlieb in the show.
Oh, okay.
Any show. But we knew about Maurice Gottlieb because of his famous Yom Kippur painting.
Right.
But the reason we showed genre painting was because we wanted to have an exhibition on how Jewish life is observed and celebrated. And we were in the middle of Washington Heights, where there were many German Jews who had emigrated because of the war. And in most of these German Jewish homes, there was a print or a copy of a Moritz Oppenheim painting. They loved his work. Right. And so what we did when we showed Moritz Oppenheim, we showed it with furniture from the period and so forth. So we put it into context. But as we got bigger and learned about getting money from the grant agencies in Washington, we branched out into much more scholarly topics, and we did exhibitions on the history of the German Jews, on Ashkenaz, on Sfarad, on the Jews of Fez, and it embraced many more works of art than just genre paintings.
Okay, thank you. So, Aliza, almost the obvious question is, I asked this also since I'm an artist and I have a daughter. What was it like growing up with a father who was an artist? And it seems like also even kind of brought his work home.
Well, not only did he bring his work home, he actually worked at home. We did have a room that was a studio, that we couldn't, or I couldn't walk into unless I had permission. I had to
Okay.
ask to go into that room. And he kept it absolutely meticulously. So it's hard to answer what it was like because I never really thought about it because I lived it. It was just there. But I do remember that we had paintings around all the time, and that was beautiful. I really enjoyed that. And I got to see all the different subjects on which my father worked. And because my father talked with me about his paintings, and I got to see how he looked through he had a little, it was about a 3 by 3 inch glass it was a square with ground glass around the edges, and the center was concave. And he would use that to see the perspective in his paintings and make sure that he had done it correctly. So that was really interesting to me and gave me an appreciation for lenses too.
Right.
A lot of things he did. And I loved the way he used color. He did teach me how to draw trees. But other than that, I was kind of afraid to paint because I could never live up to his standards. So I was afraid of that.
But he taught you, you've told me that he taught you something else about seeing. You told me a story about
yes,
how you used to walk on Riverside Drive.
Right. On Shabbos morning after he came back from shul, and his shul let out early. I guess they were fast daveners. My mother and my father and I would take a walk along a stretch of Riverside Drive, which is basically just a long continuous block. It goes for at least half a mile. And it's lined by benches, and it overlooks the Hudson River and the Palisades. And it would be pretty quiet. And we just walk back and forth a few times, sort of getting a morning stroll in, and then we'd go home for lunch. But every now and then, somebody would pass by us. My father would ask me, "How many buttons on that man's coat?" But, whoa, I better start being very observant myself. Or he'd ask me, "What color shoes was she wearing?" And he was just trying to play a game with me. I don't think he realized that he was making me become very observant of the world around me, which has come in very handy.
Yeah, and I know in my interaction with you, by the way, the people on this Zoom call should understand that Aliza has been extremely helpful with many of the details. And when I was writing this book, she lived not only with him as a child, but also was familiar with him as an adult. But also essentially as an individual, she's extremely observant. She really was very, very careful about everything that she sees, meticulous, and it's been very helpful to me. And obviously his little game effectively changed how you looked at the world, which is, kind of what an artist wants to do. That's what our job is to try to make you think about the world differently, which he did.
That she inherited from her father.
Yes, exactly. Sylvia, I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll go to the questions if there are questions from our other people on the Zoom. And that is, Sylvia, why do you think Holtz was and is so popular?
Well, the whole idea of genre painting was because average people who never had a chance to go to a museum, but who were Jewish and who participated in Jewish religious life, were very happy to buy prints of the pictures that the genre painters made, because they were not interested in fine art ideas like flower painting or forests or scenes from cabarets like the French Impressionists did. They wanted to show the beauty of Jewish life and Jewish ceremonies because that was what they believed in. They had no real ideas about other kinds of art. But to have a painter that could paint the Shabbos table or the Pesach scenes, or scenes in a synagogue, that meant a lot to them. And there are still many, many people like that today. And those are the people that buy Holtz paintings, and they cherish them. It's really amazing to me that with all the modern art around, you can still get a fellow like Holtz who knows how to paint people and endow their portraits with human qualities that you feel the people are really there. They're looking at you. You know, when you started the program and you had the scene of the chassid with the brown red payas, it was on my screen here in my home for a couple of minutes before you actually started. And it bothered me because this guy was looking at me the whole time. It was such a human depiction of a look. Same look I get if I walk in Williamsburg and I don't look like a frum girl.
Thank you. I think in a way, but I understand what you're saying, his popularity, because essentially, especially for his Jewish audience, they're seeing their own world. But I hope what I've been trying to show is that his work frequently does much, much more than that. It's not a look in the mirror. It is actually a consideration of the complexity of their world, with both children involved and different layers of meaning as you get into his paintings. And so that's what I find his work interesting. So anyway, Maya, I see that you're on, and we're going to take some questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been wonderful to have these paintings up and to hear all of your perspectives on them. We have a bunch of definitely favorites in the chat from a bunch of our viewers, but I'll start with some of the questions, and then if we have time, I'll move on to some folks' comments about specific pieces. So first, I know, Aliza, you've spoken a little bit about how your father was not a fan of just painting from photographs. He was definitely a from life artist. But we have a question further about his craft, as they say, his craft method. And they ask, did he make study sketches or use other techniques that you'd like to speak about?
Yes, he did. He used to stand in doorways with a little sketch pad, and he would quickly draw maybe two Hasidim talking to one another, or he'd sketch a detail of a table somewhere that he saw, or a storefront that he later incorporated into his paintings. But yes, he always had at least a little notepad with him and pencil.
You know that he had a little book, like a little small art book that he could carry in one hand, and he always had felt markers with him. So when he rode on the subway, he did amazing true life sketches of the people. I really would have liked to put those on exhibit because they were so masterful. In a few minutes of a subway ride, he caught the essential reality of the people sitting around the car.
Right.
That would definitely be a wonderful exhibit, a subway rider exhibit. We have another question about a specific painting, Richard, that you showed earlier about the interior of a synagogue. Unless that's the one behind Aliza. I'm not sure which is the one this person is referring to.
No, that's a different one behind Aliza, actually.
Okay. Well, this person asks if we know what synagogue that is. Maybe we can talk about both synagogues, behind Aliza and the one that you showed.
I know that both of them are in Yerushalayim, and they are different synagogues, and I don't know exactly which ones. I'm sorry.
Right. I don't either. Yeah.
Well, if anyone knows in the chat, please pop it in there. But they're both in Israel. There we have it.
Yes.
And let's see. We have another question about his subjects. So obviously we have a bunch of obviously Hasidim is a huge subject for him. But this person asks if he also painted women in religious scenes.
I can't recall seeing any, come to think of it. But I think that's because there weren't women in those religious scenes. Because
except he has a painting of Tashlich, of casting away the sins on Rosh Hashanah into a body of water, where there are women on the edge and who are also part of that ceremony. So that's one instance in which It actually it's reproduced in the book in which there are women. Then no, they're no, okay. No, he has them, but remember, he's also kind of dealing with the constraints of women in the public, in a religious setting. But here he has actually a painting of two women in Yerushalayim. It's clear they're Jewish, and quite frankly, they're gossiping, and that's part of the entire narrative of this.
Yeah, but that's not in a religious scene. I mean, yes, he has plenty of paintings that include women. I mean, there's a beauty
right.
It's a night scene where he shows a woman, an old woman, and you only see her back of it. She's kind of bent over.
One of my favorite paintings, because again,
it's
a cat.
I love that painting.
Right. But you're right. Religious scene it's I think it's possibly limited to Tashlich. Most of the synagogues that he would be going in, you would not find women praying actively, certainly not alongside of men. And so that's one of the reasons why you don't see that.
I think because he's painting from life, he's constrained to wherever he is, which is usually the men's section when it comes to shul, especially. We have another question about.
I just want to add one more thing. Also, the blessing of the new moon, the Chodesh, which he has a number of paintings of. Here in this one, the women are alongside of it. Are they part of the ceremony? Not per se, but they're part of experiencing this ritual, which is done on at the end of Shabbos.
Thank you so much. And we have this very thoughtful question here of this concept of Holtz being both, excuse me, my cat is here, both insider and outsider in various paintings that you've showed. And the person says, it strikes me that as a painter of other people in the particularity of their lives, he is already an outsider by definition. In his paintings of Hasidic life, he seems to be somewhat of an insider-outsider. Was there a group in which he felt like a consummate insider?
Aliza, I'll let you address that, because of course I didn't know him personally other than one interview.
I don't believe that he did not consider himself a Chassid, but he loved to be around Hasidim, because I think what he captured in his paintings and he loved about them is that they have such character. You can practically see them carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and at the same time celebrating the joy of nature, of the holiday, of the divine, of family. So I think he captures that well. So, as far as insider, outsider, I think he had a feeling for them. I don't think he identified with them per se. I don't know if that answers the question.
I have a comment on that, because I wrote about it. It's because I was essentially dealing with this in the book a lot, because since he's an Orthodox Jew, he lives in a Jewish neighborhood. It's Washington Heights. It's not intensely Jewish. Well, there's German Jews up there. There's that there, but he's not in Williamsburg, and he's not in Crown Heights. But his paintings of Hasidim, I kind of maintain that in making those paintings, he becomes a Hasid. He became that in his creative act of making the painting. He was under no illusions. He knew exactly who he was. Totally rooted and really a self-conscious individual of who he was, effectively as an Orthodox Jew who wasn't a Hasid. But in those paintings, I think he steps over the line.
Very perceptive of you, Richard. I think it's absolutely true. He wasn't a Chassid himself, but he became a Chassid when he painted those paintings. But I have to say that I spoke to people who have watercolors that he made that sold in galleries at the Cape. Did you know about that, Aliza?
I know that he was in many galleries, yes.
He was in many galleries, and those paintings were not Jewish paintings. Those landscapes and trees, water, and we don't have any of those because I don't even know where you would get them. But he managed to eke out a part of his living came from selling those beautiful, beautifully executed paintings of natural scenes at the Cape.
Well, he loved nature. He loved to go out to the woods, that's why the picnic scene, there are many paintings of just a country road, some houses alongside. Sometimes it's just trees and rocks,
Right.
overlooking a river with cliffs. Many, many such paintings. And he did spend quite a bit of time in the Poconos and in the Berkshires.
Right.
Thank you so much. And we have another comment asking if Aliza could comment herself on the portrait of her mother that we looked at the beginning of the program.
Well, I actually remember my mother sitting for that portrait. I was about 2 years old. And my mother said that she sat for 80 hours total for that portrait.
Oh,
But she really was that beautiful. And it was hard to sit still for that long. I do know that.
but you know that
But
in order to paint that portrait,
it,
her father had to know other esteemed portrait painters. I know for sure that he must have known the work of John Singer Sargent. Last year, there was an exhibit in Boston where I live at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum of the portraits of John Singer Sargent. And after I saw those, I realized he had to have seen Sargent portraits before he made that portrait of your mother.
well, he had studied so many artists. I mean, we have books and books, bookshelves filled with art books of the masters and people that some artists I really didn't know of very well. But yeah, he studied a lot and he was very interested in all kinds of art, not just genre art, not just portraits, not just landscape artists, some of everything.
I would have liked to, when we did the exhibition, I would have liked to include some of his little sketch pads, the little ones.
Yeah.
Felt markers. They were like works of art. Where are they now?
I found a couple of them with little pen drawings that he did. I know what you're talking about. My brother might have them. I'm not sure.
Those are really.
But I have to go through. There's a lot of stuff I still have to go through. I might be able to find them.
Well, if you do find them, it would be worth exhibiting them.
By the way, if I can just interject in terms of Holtz as an artist from an artist's point of view, we have scheduled a live event at Deret El, 135 East 29th Street, which was the synagogue he went to for the afternoon services. Like I say, my shul, on January 28th. And we will have there two artists, Eli Frucht and Hava Roth, both of whom knew Holtz well, and both of them were considered to be friends. Hava traveled with the family and was quite close to him, and are both working artists. So perhaps actually insights into some of his methodology will be in a little bit more depth, will be available at that. We'll also have the rabbi there, Rabbi Mermelstein, and also very likely Rabbi Gabriel Bellino. So I'll be hosting that. I'll be moderating that. Again, that's January the 28th at Deret El.
If I may interject, and this is a bit off topic, but I realized one thing I really would like people to know is a little bit about my father's character, because he was straight as an arrow and incredibly generous. And one of the great stories about him, I think, is when he walked by a gallery in Israel and saw what was purportedly one of his paintings, realized it was a forgery. So he walked into the gallery owner did not know who he was. And my father asked about the painting, who painted it? It's a Holtz painting. And so my father said, is there a chance that I could meet the artist? And the gallery owner arranged for a meeting between the artist and my father. And it was a young Russian artist, evidently a really good artist, struggling, trying to feed his family. And my father then said, I'm Itshak Holtz. Why did you copy my painting? And the artist said, it's a really great painting. I really liked it. And, so I said, but you shouldn't be copying things, is what my father said. And you're really a good artist. So why don't you paint from real life rather than copying things? And he invited that artist to work with him, come with him when they go out together. And my father would teach him to paint from real life.
What
Which
a
was
wonderful,
actually amazing.
he had such a generous spirit.
Yeah, throughout his life, he was like that. He was very, very generous with his time and his talent.
Wonderful story. And I know we're over the hour, but we have a few more questions that I'm going to ask before we finish. I'm going to actually combine two questions that I have here because I think they're related. The first is if there's a teacher at the League who he viewed as intrinsic to his development, and also some of his maybe some of his idols from the great masters. Specifically, this person asked about Rembrandt, but if there were any others that inspired him.
Okay.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, at the Art Students League, he had two main teachers, and even though I've written it, it's starting to escape me right now. I'll come up with them. But there were two actually very different teachers. They're both realists, and both Jewish. And okay, so we have Harry Sternberg. He studied Holtz studied with Sternberg. And he also studied with Robert Brackman, both of whom are very well known, rather different. Sternberg, a much more kind of down-to-earth painter of the people kind of thing, a bit more left-wing, I believe, in my researches, and Brackman, a society painter, quite successful. And that was the two main artists at the League. And then, of course, he studied with Robert Philipp, at the National Academy of Design later. So he had very, very good teachers and learned a lot from them. It was evidently that Robert Philipp who encouraged him to pursue the Jewish subject matter, which almost was surprising. He was also Jewish, but almost in a very different world, a much more high society world. But he encouraged him to pursue the Jewish subject matter. So that's at least three of the main teachers that he had, and the first two really directly related to the League, and the third one at the National Academy of Design.
And what was the second part of the question? Oh, the great masters.
Yes,
he loved Rembrandt. He loved Toulouse-Lautrec. There was a contemporary artist, Louis Boza, whose work was, the artist's name, the master's name escapes me for a moment. Oh gosh.
Boza studied with John Sloan. Oh, and right. He also talks about Boza, like the
kind of made caricatures almost. And he loved that artist, and now I can't remember the name. That's terrible.
Okay.
Join the club.
Well, talking about
but anyway, yes, we had a lot of books from the great masters, and yes, we had books about John Singer Sargent, a lot of books about Rembrandt, and Monet, Manet, the Impressionists, Corot, gosh, a lot of artists. And we would go to museums together. I learned so much from just being with my father, walking through a museum, and he would talk about the action in a painting, or talk about how the brush strokes would indicate some of the action or the heaviness of a scene or an atmosphere. It was really interesting.
What is important about Holtz is that here you have a man who comes from a Polish, could say probably working class background, grows up in Israel, and his art education in Bezalel, I think, was more practical than anything else, comes to the Art Students League, and he really rolls up his sleeves and he becomes an artist, 100% an artist. All the names, all the great masters that you're talking about, many artists and many Jewish artists, they know about them just a little superficially. Not Holtz. He immersed himself in that history and in that tradition, and he saw that tradition as his tradition. That's why it was he took great pride that he was part of the, quote, old master tradition, that tradition also of exactitude and hard work. It's interesting, I must admit, there are two artists that are missing from Holtz's canon in the 20th century. And it's very revealing. Chagall and Picasso. Okay, Chagall, the greatest artist, the greatest Jewish artist of the 20th century, and Picasso, possibly the greatest artist of all of any kind of artist of the 20th century. Those are two individuals that he didn't talk about, and or evidently, I understand, was critical of Picasso, because the sensibility is radically different than what he was trying to do as an artist.
That's right.
And so he totally immersed himself in the old master tradition. But again, I have to say, not in a reactionary way, not in a way, because there's a lot of modernism, frankly, in his work. The whole technique of having a figure in the painting looking out at the viewer is very modernist, almost also depending upon the notion of photography, not using photography, but as a photographic technique. So he's very much a man still of the 20th century, but again, immersed in the old masters as for tools for him to make himself a greater artist.
He was an honest man.
He was an honest man.
I think that's a very important thing. And I don't know if you can say it about the two that you just mentioned.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way for us to begin wrapping up this evening. We have many more questions in the chat, but I think that's just an impetus for everyone to check out Richard's book to learn more about Yitzhak Holtz. If you have any more questions, just let us know. I'm happy to field them for you. But here, Richard's holding up the book now. Definitely, Colette from Abbeville Press put a link in the chat where you can receive a 20% off discount for the book. So please, go check that out. Definitely, it's a beautiful, stunning book. As Sylvia during our test Zoom said, very, very heavy. So definitely, you're getting your information's worth, and you're here. It's honestly, each one is a frameable work of art in itself, each plate. So definitely check that out. It's a beautiful book. And I'm just gonna, for 1 minute, since I did promise in the beginning, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask out loud, this is the time. Does anyone want to raise their hand and ask any questions out loud before we end this evening? Any hands up? Well, if not, I think we will say goodnight. And I want to thank everyone so much for joining us. This was a wonderful way to both celebrate Richard's book and to remember an incredible artist. Thank you so much, Aliza. Oh, we have one question. One person who wants to raise their hand. Barbara, did you want to ask a question out loud?
I did. Did he ever get political in terms of saying, like, I won't get involved with Picasso because I know that when the Nazis came into France, and people were signing things about what the Nazis were doing. Do you know what I mean? Or did he hate Degas because Degas was a real anti-Semite? Did he have any of those politics in his art?
No.
Where he just didn't want to learn anything from these people?
No, I don't think so. He would look at all art. I think he appreciated it, but he didn't like it. And so he didn't
Uh-huh.
like it.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I think our last question of the evening from Joshua, I'm going to prompt you to unmute right now.
Okay, do you guys hear me now?
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, so just a question, since Aliza's here, but for her and for her brother, as a father being very much into Jewish art and in particular Hasidic art, how did that influence raising you? Like, in other words, did he teach you about Hasidic traditions, even though he wasn't personally Hasidic, or did he focus teaching you art? Like by being this artist with a focus on Jewish and Hasidic life, how did he raise you guys? Was that separate completely, or that influenced how he raised you and you guys grew up, you and your brother?
I was raised Orthodox, as was my brother, not Hasidic.
Okay, I'm asking.
We went to Yeshiva. Both my brother and I went to Yeshiva Soloveitchik. So
But
that's
like,
how it started.
but like being into Hasidic art, do you like, even though he wasn't personally Hasidic, did he have Hasidic customs he liked doing, or we spoke about Hasidim? That was just the art that he did, basically.
I think it was just the art, really. I mean, he had this very gentle, if you will, Hasidic nature about him that he imbued into his art, or he imbued the art with, is the way I should say it. But I would not say that we were raised Hasidic. That was not part of the home environment. We were just Orthodox.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Joshua.
You're
And I
welcome.
think this is why it's so valuable to have a family member here, not, so we have this wonderful breadth of stories from Sylvia, Aliza, Richard. Again, thank you so much for doing this
Thank
for
you
us
for
this
hosting
evening.
us. I really appreciate it. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. The museum is so
Thank
happy to
you.
do so. And please, if anyone hasn't visited the museum at Aldridge Street, please pay us a visit. We're a beautiful historic synagogue. Honestly, the synagogue behind Aliza reminds me a lot of our Beit Midrash downstairs. So please come pay us a visit. We hope everyone had a fantastic new year and stays warm this winter. It's definitely not easy out there. So stay safe, everyone. Have a great evening. And
Thank you so
for
much.
joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Maya.
Good night.
Good night.